record. All right. So we had three discussion questions on the table for our breakout rooms. What was the thesis of the text? What are the similarities and the distinctions between last week's reading and this week's reading? And three, what stood out to you most about the perceived impact of matriarchal family structures on Black masculinity and manhood? Who would like to share what was discussed in their breakout rooms? No,
I I can go. Did someone already volunteer to go? Oh,
please.
okay. We discussed basically the thesis of the text, which was Black masculinity has been altered post and pre-slavery. During slavery is when they didn't allow Black men to be leaders, and the ones that were leaders were killed. Also that Black men didn't see Black women as a collective as their property in order to protect. After slavery, which I had brought up to the group, that the Black household, how like during Reaganomics, crack cocaine was entered into the Black community, and therefore you see a large portion of Black males being absent from family, which also caused a lack of Black manhood because they're not there. And then the fact that Black women had to take over the role of being the provider. So therefore, Black boys are already at a disadvantage that they can't achieve Black malehood, because in the text it said that women can't provide Black boys the Black male leadership that they need. And so we discussed that. And then also that, what was it? That Black manhood has a certain aspect as far as learning, because most of teachers are women at a very young age for school. And once the woman or the woman teacher can't help the Black male student, they'll send them to the principal, which is usually a woman included. So then they have this hatred towards women as they get older. So, and that's what we discussed basically.
Thank you, Sheree. You guys had a very comprehensive discussion. Let's
Yeah.
get two more comments before we move on to my notes. Someone else? Dominic, what was discussed in your breakout room?
We discussed how Black masculinity has changed over time as well through slavery and then post-slavery, and how the absence of a father makes it seem like that in the reading it would make it seem like they had no other role models to look up to, so they couldn't get that male masculinity that they needed. But in some cases that isn't always true. Like you could find it in a female as well.
Absolutely.
And we also discussed how the theme was just that they were trying to discover how male masculinity has changed and keeps getting rebranded over time.
Thank you, Dominic.
Yeah.
One more, please, and we'll move on to my notes. Anyone else? Catherine, what was discussed in your breakout room?
Hi. We also talked about the perspective of like boy being surrounded around women, that like the moms, like especially the ones that are left without fathers, like their role models are their mothers and the teachers and stuff like that. So they have this only one perspective of it. And then I also talked about how it mentioned something like that they didn't come into society thinking that to become a man they had to like support women and like validate them, but that's how like I think it was like after slavery that society set that standard, but that's not what they thought they needed to validate themselves as a man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, y'all. And I think too, what's important to understand, I'll get to in my notes, right? A lot of these ideas are contested ideas, right? So this idea that um, black men being removed from homes and being raised by black women prevent them from becoming black men. That's not an argument that is wholeheartedly agreed with, right? And what the authors do is they show you how these ideas are are contested, right? So keep in mind that these a lot of these claims within the arguments is argued, right? And then he's also presenting a counter argument for that claim. So a lot of these ideas and notions are contested. Okay. So the driving question behind this article is, how does a boy become a man, right? So this is the question that they're working through. Another thing I want you all to think about as you move through this semester, and I'm going to kind of shift our focus to our journal, right? And we know that we have 4 components to the journal. You have your thesis, you have your analysis, you have your contemporary analysis, and that 4th component is the question, okay? I want to expand this concept of question for you all, right? And there's really like 3 ways that you can think about a question. One is very straightforward, right? I've read this, I don't quite understand this, hence I have a question, right? That's the first iteration of a question. Second being, I've read this, I understand it, but it's making me think about something else, right? And that something else could be a whole nother field of research that I may begin to dive into, right? This may become my thesis, this may become my dissertation, right? So the second iteration of a question is a question that produces intellectual curiosity or can produce intellectual work, okay? The third iteration of a question is a question that's steeped in intellectual work, right? And this reading is a production of intellectual work that is steeped in a question. Because again, the question that's driving this article is, how does a boy become a man, right? And he has a whole article that's been produced by working through and around this question. So as scholars, I want you to begin to shift your journal entries and really how you think about questions as a whole, from the first iteration of a question to start thinking and working through the last 2 iterations of a question, right? Questions that produce intellectual curiosity, right? And then questions that your work will work through, right? So for me, the question that's driving my dissertation, right? What is the ideal pedagogy to really educate African people? So all of my research and all of my writing is grounded to answer that question, right? So again, as I begin to read your journals, I want to see you start to evolve your questions from, I don't understand this, so hence there's a question, to more of, this sparked my curiosity, so I have this question. Or I want to write a paper that answers this question. And I want you all to start to be able to think about questions from that paradigm, okay? So we know what question that this essay or this article works through. It says, scholars historically and more recently argue that black men have been collectively emasculated because of, 1, enslavement caused a situation where black men could not protect themselves or their families, right? And then 2, a matriarchal system within black communities caused by an absent father or an overpowering black woman within the context of a patriarchal U.S. society that expects men to be the head of the household. And then 3, economic oppression that rendered black men unable to provide for their family. Now, I want to kind of focus on 2 a little bit, right? This idea that matriarchal systems within black communities caused by an absent father or an overpowering black woman within the context of a patriarchal U.S. society. So this part right here, within the context of a patriarchal U.S. society, becomes very important, right? Why would I say that within the context of a U.S. patriarchal society? Why does that become important? Why do you think I would say that?
Because there would be changes in the decisions taken by men. In this, there is this consideration that the decisions will be different, and in key ways it will be different. So it's going to have an effect on the children growing up.
Absolutely. So to articulate what Muhammad says another way, right? To paraphrase Muhammad, if we're thinking about this is the first reading that we had in the semester, right? Manhood in pre-colonial West Africa, right? How they would define manhood, how they view the idea of a matriarchal system is going to be vastly different from how black men will view this matriarchal system in the world today in the US, because the US has its own contextualization of what manhood should look and feel like, right? And within a US contextualization of manhood, it should not be where the woman is running the household, right? It should be the man who wears the pants, it should be the man who's the breadwinner, right? This is within this US paradigm. Personally, right, I grew up within a household that has a two-parent household. I had my mom and my dad. They're still together, right? Bible-believing Christian household, right? So if you are to ask anyone in my family, if you were to ask my mom, you have to ask my dad, right, they're all going to say, my pops is the head of the household, right? That's what they'll all articulate. They'll all verbalize this fact. But knowing and being part of that family household, I know really when it comes down to it, my mom is running shit, right? And my pops knows that too. And there's really no real beef within that. But because of religion, they articulate this notion that my pops is the head of the household. And really, this is no slight to my pops. This is not to emasculate my pops, but just be how the way that their personalities are, we know that that's the case, right? And I would argue for a large portion of black households that are two-parent households, that's how the dynamics are, right? And again, and this is no slight to men, but this is just highlighting the fact that black men identify their masculinity and manhood different from how everyone else in U.S. society may identify that, okay? Again, this idea that these ideas and notions are contested, this manifests within the work of Bell Hooks, right? May she rest in power, a formerly transitioned ancestor. It says, Bell Hooks argues that African men were not socialized to see themselves as protectors of all women, but the protector of the women in their specific ethnic group or family, right? So this is what she's arguing here, is that hold on this idea that black men were emasculated through this process of enslavement, right? Because from her vantage point, right, they did not view all of the women on the plantation as their women, right? If you didn't come from my ethnic group or you're not part of my family, I don't really have a responsibility towards your protection, right? Now, that's her argument. And with the, again, I want to overemphasize, the article is allowing you to make your decision either way, right? Here's one side of the story. Here's another side of the story. You can determine what makes most sense for you, right? Again, I want to point this out because what this speaks to is how. So there's two ways, well, there's a multiple ways of reading. But for me, I read at two levels, right? First, I read for what's being said, right? So I know that the what in this article is how does a boy become a man, right? I know that's the what. But then I'm also attentive to how does the author present this problematic? How does the author present this thesis? How does the author go about answering this question, how does a boy become a man, right? Another way to think about what I'm talking about is this methodology, right? What is the author's methodology for writing? And if you think about the two previous articles, which kind of gets to our breakout room conversation question, right? The similarities and the differences, one of the similarities are the method, right? The author never says this is what it is. The author presents you information from two opposing sides, and you're able to come to your own conclusion, right? So this is a methodological approach to writing, right? And I want you also to begin to start reading and thinking about how this written production is being produced, right? How is the author going about making this argument? if we were to take this conversation and apply it to a musical conversation, right? And we could use hip hop as a frame of reference. We could talk about the lyrics of Kendrick Lamar, right? So it's what Kendrick Lamar raps about, right? His life in Compton, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then it's also how Kendrick raps about his life in Compton, right? One could argue, and this probably test your age, but one could argue what Kendrick and what DJ Quick is rapping about, the material, right? The subject matter is similar, but how they go about it is vastly different, right? And you could apply this to writing styles as well, right? So the author may be making a certain point, but how they go about making that point becomes important also. And I want you to start thinking about that how, because here's a practical understanding for why I want you to think about this, especially for those who are wanting to go into higher education. Predominantly for students of culture, you're going to come across information that you vehemently disagree with. In fact, the information that you may come across will be violent to you, to your being, right? And if you're really serious about higher ed, depending especially on what field you want to go into or what discipline you want to go into, your exposure to that may be a lot or a little, right? But the point is this: you may not agree with what they're saying. That may be of no interest to you. But what may be of interest to you is how they're saying it, right? So you may be able to adopt a writing style from a certain author who you just disagree with everything that they talk about, but the way they talk about becomes useful for you, right? So these are various ways that you can engage readings and materials and make sure that you get something useful from that material. Because again, a lot of the stuff that you'll be forced to read won't be useful for you as a person, but what may be useful is how they went about producing that text. Okay. So here, discussing the impact of matriarchal structures on the household. One of the impacts was the absence of the Black father and the presence of the exceptionally powerful Black woman. It caused a situation that stifles Black boys' ability to be men. As a man must teach a boy to become a man. Again, this is an argument. This is a position, but it's also contested, right? They also argue that economic oppression deprives Black males of their manhood. Black feminist literature claims racist scholarship creates the myth that Black women cause a division within African families, right? So again, here's where this contested terrain. So some authors believe that the hyper powerful Black woman creates a space in the household to where Black boys are not able to be men, right? But then we have Black feminist scholars like Bell Hooks who argue like, nah, that's not what the case is. In fact, it's racist structures that create this idea and this myth of the overpowering Black women that does not allow Black men to feel comfortable within these U.S. patriarchal contextualized notions of Black manhood, right? So what these Black feminist authors are pointing to is not, is the racist structure that's the problem, right? It's not the Black woman and who is powerful that's the problem. It's the structure that creates the problem, right? So again, this is where if you read closely, you can see how these ideas are contested. Then it talks about how Black men begin to claim their manhood, right? It says, and it talks about the Black Power movement and the urban Black male, and how through acts of so-called violence, through uprisings, right, they were able to take back and reclaim their image of Black manhood. It says this expression of rage by urban Black males that was once viewed as a political vehicle for achieving social justice as now seen as a pointless, dangerous, and maladaptive, right? So at a time, they looked at the Black Power era, the rebellions of the 60s as, again, Black men reclaiming their manhood, right? But now, when you see folks going to the street and doing the same things that got Black folks to reclaim their manhood, is viewed as something that's problematic, right? Or maladaptive. So this idea that Black men define manhood different from how the Western world defined manhood. The article asserts that the work of Watts, is a scholar, he found that the way that Black men articulate manhood is in alignment with scholars who want to create new versions of manhood that are separate from how the U.S. contextualizes manhood, right? And they say that the scholarship on Black manhood from Black thinkers is in alignment with how activists and the larger community view this idea of manhood. I will move past that. This notion of Karanga, I really like how he articulates the roles of Black men and women, and the idea that Black men view both the duality of the feminine principle and the masculine principle embodied in both the man and the woman. This is how Maulana Karanga articulates that fact. He says that the woman's and the man's role is the same. They have the shared responsibility in love and struggle, right? And he provides us with 7 core qualities that should be of importance for both Black men and Black women. To be knowledgeable, to be principled, committed, disciplined, and be achievement oriented, and finally audacious, right? And I think it's really interesting he chooses this idea of being audacious, and we could talk about that later. And then this question about he works it through the Million Man March, right? And the issue of the Million Man March not having a space for women, which again is contested. He says that is not necessarily the case. But he makes the claim that, all Black male institutions, rites of passage, colleges, etc., they're only acceptable in the fact or in the event that the same type of energy is being dedicated to uplift and empower Black women. And if the energy is not evenly distributed, then you'll create a system to where it will be problematic, right? So the author sees no problems with creating specified institutions for Black men and Black manhood and Black masculinity, but he argues that the same energy must be applied to establishing these institutions for Black women. So I'll put a pause on my notes and we'll jump into our fishbowl. Again, you could talk about my notes. You could talk about your breakout rooms. You could talk about your journal. All that's on the table. Luis, we got you as a volunteer. Anybody else want to volunteer?
I'll go.
Lizette and LJ and Muhammad. Okay, 1 second. LJ, Lizette, and Muhammad. All right. Whoever wants to set it off, it's on you.
I could go first.
All right.
So in the article, there was a proposal for all Black male schools with Black male teachers, and I think for the most part, it's a good proposal because here in the LA area, you see Jewish schools with Jewish students, and they speak Hebrew. They have their own religion. You see the same thing with Russians, Orthodox. They have their own religion, language, and to an extent, some Asian communities. And these specifically are private institutions. And I think they're not. This is nothing racist or anything like that. I think this is good. It's a good alternative for the public school system because the public school system will ethnically cleanse you, religiously, and to an extent linguistically. And if you look at these communities like Jews and some Asian communities, they're very prosperous because they stay together and they have these private institutions. And in the inner cities, you don't see that with Blacks, and to an extent, Hispanics kind of don't have their own institutions like this. And I think we should look into this as well.
Very good call out, Luis. Thank you, man. Who's next?
I can go next. So for me, I just had a thought, right? When you were talking, Professor, earlier about, thinking of, the thoughts that are probably, how some of the reading becomes thought provoking on something that might be, that might has like a, like a social lens or, can apply to, everyday living. So with that being said, One thing I can say, from reading this, which was a good read, and I think reading such as this, it kind of highlights the complexities of being a black man, in this country, just period, no matter where you go. Um, what stood out for me is, if we kind of make this to like, if we kind of make this relatable to like, something that's kind of socially relevant, you look at the NFL, right? So the NFL has a problem with, black head coaches or hiring giving black men, these coaches the opportunity to lead teams. And so, you look at a league that's generating billions of dollars, over 70% of its workforce, essentially, right, in the capitalist system, its workforce is black men. Yet these franchises, these teams being led by white men overwhelmingly. And and so it makes you wonder, well, why is that the problem? Like, what is it? What's the issue? And for me, when I read, articles as such, it definitely highlights where a lot of these white men are today, meaning these owners, these general managers, these franchises, they don't trust black men to be in these positions of leadership to lead other black men. So it can be, it can be a plethora of reasons why that's the case. In the article, it kind of talked about, as leaders kind of came up in the ranks, whether it was in slave quarters or in certain communities, white men made sure to annihilate them, to destroy them. And, and they were destroyed and people were killed publicly so that you can kind of, send a message to other black men, like, this is what you're up against. But, to kind of bring it back to, like the NFL, you have a lot of these white people that don't trust, they kind of view us as being less than men. So if we're living a traditional, if we're kind of living according to tradition, right, this Western train of thought, which is obviously white, you're going to be led to believe that you can't trust the black man, that we're not smart enough, we don't have what it takes to lead, some of these teams. And as a result, that's why, even though you have folks who are qualified to do the job and can do it, they're not given opportunities. And it kind of, at least for me, it resonates with some of this reading, like that thought process for for mainstream and a lot of white people to feel the way they do about black men, in terms of being less than, like, we're not real men, we're not real leaders, we're incapable. And a lot of the stuff that Lawson kind of kind of spoke about in this article.
I think another way to put that, LJ, is like, if you can't run your own family, you damn sure can't run my team, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that part.
Yep. Lizette or Muhammad?
All right. So what I was thinking was, you see that there's this education system where people educate both men and women, and they get ready, in terms of education. So what I feel is, like, when it comes to thinking about this family that's powered by men or by women, it's not gonna uh, have like a lot of effect, because we are thinking like in the cerebral level, but not like, the, because in terms of the cerebral level, men and women will think the same if they're both like educated and they know everything. So it's not going to have an effect on the growing up of the children, or how the family is taken care of. But some of the scholars, I would say, they were saying in the passage that, it's gonna have an effect. So, and some of the scholars were saying that, yeah, that's kind of the racist structure that you have, that black men and women, they would have like difference in opinion when it comes to making key decisions. So what I feel is like, yeah, probably in some circumstances where there are some women, they don't have the knowledge about black, like about what it is required to for the family to grow up. It might be a case, but where the women knows that what has to be done, it's gonna be the same way. uh, if a man was there and he knew, and it applies to the men too. If they didn't know how to grow up the family in a certain way, they wouldn't be able to do. Where women who know that how to emphasize on the key family decisions, so she will be better able to assist the family members. So what I was yeah, this is what I was thinking, that actually it's kind of the knowledge and the education system, that's the main thing, not being men or being women, and and the results. So yeah, that's my
And then I don't want to say paraphrase Muhammad. I don't think that's an accurate term, but another way how I'm thinking about what I'm hearing from you, I'll put it that way, um, is that it's more than just your sex that makes up this ability, right? It's things of educational background, class you could also throw in there, right? Or another way of thinking about it is access, right? Like who has access to what information that will allow you to be the most efficient parent. So that's how I'm hearing what I'm
exactly, sir. Yes, thank you.
definitely. Thank you, Lizette.
Yes. Hello. I just wanted to share something that interested me from this reading was how black men wanted to like practice their manhood during the slave times. Um and for standing up they were killed or ridiculous. And I think and now like they are expected to be like a man in society, like society has like the aspect, society expects them like to be a man. um and also I wanted to share a connection that I had with you when you said that your parents your dad, you will say your dad was the head of the household, but it was really your mom. And in my household, it's like the same. We always said it that my dad was the head of the household, but um, he was, but not really because yeah, men provided the money and like they made the decisions. But I think it was more because the woman was kind of oppressed, and I grew up in this like conservative family where men should like take all the decisions, and women just do what men said. But no, yeah, that's what I mean.
Thank you, Lizette. Congrats to all of them. This is a really dope fishbowl. One thing I was thinking about when I was listening to Luis, and he was talking about how these specified communities are able to advocate for themselves to have their own educational systems. I don't know if you may not be old enough to remember this either, but on Slauson, kind of east towards, if you're headed towards downtown, if you take Slauson all the way, you would run into like this. There's this building, this gray building. It had red, black, and green like bricks in the middle of the building. That was the Marcus Garvey School, and it used to be I believe, an elementary school in a junior high school, right? And this was an institution that was ran for black children, that was ran by black men and black women. And I only bring that up to say that there was a time where we had these institutions. Another thing I'm thinking, for me at least, right, because I'm now teaching this course, I've been also with you all reading a lot of the material that Dr. Bush has produced around these conversations of manhood, right? Um, what happened to those institutions? The funding wasn't there, and if you think about the communities that Luis mentioned that had these institutions, i.e., the Jewish community, i.e., the Asian communities, not only are they very unified, they're economically unified, right? And the way that they situate their money, it would ensure that institutions like the Marcus Garvey schools, per se, won't go under, right? Um, so that's definitely, it made me think about that. Like we had this, and then if you're thinking about the time, so there's a temporal analysis of the reading, right? This, for me, screams the mid 90s from the references that are being discussed. The social phenomenon of the time is very much mid 90s, and you could tell that the scholarship built on a lot of thought that was popular in the late 80s to early 90s, right? Like this whole production of Afrocentric thought, you could tell is this articles are built on that, right? It's important for me to think about like how can we bring this into our now, right? And for me, one of the questions that this reading produced is what are scholars in 2020 writing and thinking about Black manhood, right? So if for thinking about last week's readings, the work of John Agbu becomes central in the conversation for the reading last week, right? This week, Bell Hooks makes a very predominant appearance, right? So what are scholars, intellectuals, and activists thinking about in the 2020s about manhood, and then how does what they're writing about now fit and align or not align with what's being written about within this theory is one of the questions that I have while I am engaging this material. Is there any other questions, comments, or well, let me put it this way. I want to hear other questions, comments, and concerns from those who I have not heard from today. So thank you all who participated in the fishbowl. We'll open it up to a broader conversation. Go ahead, Sheree.
I thought a really good like passage in the text this week was that it said that men who understands community has more regard for the voices of his peers, and then also understands the voice of women, including themselves, which I thought like earlier in the course you asked like what is our definition of like masculinity and macho or whatever. And for me, like being an open person who's like unbiased but also sticks to what they believe in fit in with that. So I was very like, okay, that to me, that I mean, I'm not a Black man, so I wouldn't understand, but as far as like being open-minded and hearing everyone out, and then also applying that to your knowledge and to other people's knowledge and how they see other things, I thought was a really good example of like just the starting point or tip of the iceberg as far as like Black manhood, as far as like just being that person that's open to everything, because that's how I view everything, because there's some things I don't know that I don't see from different people's point of view, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting because I never thought of it like that. And it just seems that the more open minded and less biased people are, it seems that they're more intelligible with gathering information and also having structures towards people as a person, not just who they are. So I thought that one was really interesting.
You know, that's a really good point, Sheree, because what that made me think about was the first reading of the semester, right? The teaching of Ptahhotep, where he says if you're in a position of someone who judges, right, listen to both parties completely before you make your decision. And I think it's echoing the same sentiment. So yes, great call out. Who else wants to share? Amanda, what were your thoughts on the reading? Amanda Gaskin. Emily, what were your thoughts on the reading?
Um, so I like the way that I kind of understood the reading. It was very much like examining why like Black men should be like viewed as masculine, and then there's also parts where like feminine like women like authors would come in and be like they should be this way because that's how traditional like things are. And then at like the very end, like it like said like basically we have to like always be on the lookout, always be examining why like keep examining what is too feminine and what is too masculine for Black men, you know? And I found that interesting.
I'm pose this to the class, but something that you said, Emily, makes me think about this. The term examination, right? Because I think that's a spot on depiction of what's going on within the text, right? It's an examination. It's not a prose. It's not a discourse. Even it's very much an examination. In fact, when you think about essay, right, like the act of producing an essay is almost synonymous with exploration and trial, right? For me, another way to think about exploration, trial, and essay is examination, right? I'm not really coming in with a grounded position in this, right? I'm going to examine this subject matter, right? To Cherie's point, I'm going to remain open to the possibilities as I examine this subject matter. And I'm also going to be dialectical in my approach to my examination. Somebody please articulate or define for me or provide a working definition of what they think I mean when I say be dialectical. Or dialectics is another way to think about what I'm saying. What does dialectics mean? Another way to think about dialectics, duality, right? What do you think this means? Dominic, go ahead.
I think you mean by like take everything in and then see how there's like opposing sides of it and like see all the different types of aspects you could like view it in. Yeah. Like if you were this person's situation, how you would view it, and if you were standing on the other side, how they would view it too.
Absolutely, that's a perfectly articulated definition of what I'm trying to get you to think about, right? Another way for me to articulate what I just said and what Dominic just said is the notion of not or, more importantly, but, okay? So not Afrofuturism or Afro-pessimism, but how can it be Afro-pessimism and Afrofuturism, right? So don't focus on how they're solely separated, right? But how we could bring these two things together. Yes, conversations around Black Lives Matter can be dialectical, right? So LJ, if you can you kind of bring the dialectics of Black Lives Matter?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is because, you know, for what I was gonna say for whatever reason, but for obvious reasons, you have people who for whatever reasons of their personal choice feel that Black Lives Matter is it's a movement other than social justice, right? So it becomes divisive. It you know, people tend to think that, well, if you're saying Black Lives Matter, you're saying only they'll attribute only onto it. So if like right now I have a Black Lives Matter shirt on, and you know, for some people they may feel that, oh, you know, he's only interested in Black life, you know, and I'm not concerned with other life. And so for those people, those are the ones that, you know, amongst their friends or, you know, their constituents, they're quick to rebuttal all lives matter. And so in a dialectical conversation, you can explain to them that, you know, no one is saying that only Black lives matter. But when Black lives do matter, then we can get to a point where all lives matter. And also in the movement with Black Lives Matter, I would say it includes all people of culture, because in demonstrations and in movements I've been a part of, it's always included women, it's always included, you know, my brown brothers and sisters and all other, you know, marginalized people. So for me, when you were talking about dialectical, I think Black Lives Matter, for those who don't know, or those who for whatever reason think otherwise, it's a tipping point.
Yeah. And so I think another way I could articulate what you said perfectly, OJ, is the dialectics of Black Lives Matter is all lives matter can't be a thing until Black lives do matter. And that's the dialectics of the term Black Lives Matter. So that's a spot on interpretation. Lizette, did you have your hand up?
Me? No.
I thought it was Lizette Aguilar, I believe. She had her hand up for a moment.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I wanted to say something.
Yeah, please.
So what I think about it is like normally it kind of refers to like two conflicting ideas
Mhm.
are both true at the same time,
Yes.
and it's about the process of figuring out how it is.
Yep.
Yeah, normally like this, I think.
Yeah. Spot on. Thank you all. Okay, so we're going to call it a day. I want to point out to you what your reading is for next week. So let me share my screen here. Bear with me for a moment. Under our classroom section. Come on. Okay, so the next reading will be Black Boys Denied the Right to Be Men. So this is about the denial of your ability to become a man. So that will be for next week's reading. I will send that out to you no later than Thursday or Friday, but if you don't want to wait, those are there available to you. Again, today at 4, we have the extra credit extra credit opportunity. I'll be discussing Afrofuturism and the notion of Astro Black theory. So please, if you can, attend that. I think it'll be really a dope conversation that you guys would get a lot out of. I'll be discussing some of the major components and major players of Afrofuturism. I'll be discussing the major theories and how it pertains to academic production, and then most importantly, for me at least, the artistic aesthetic of Afrofuturity, and that could be interpreted through the lens of artists like Janelle Monáe, Erykah Badu. I don't know if you are familiar with Sun Ra, is another artist who kind of embodies this Afrofuturistic persona. And then for those who are into West Coast music, a la the Super Bowl halftime performance, right? You would not have that sound if it was not for George Clinton, right? And this idea of the funk. And that's also a very much an Afrofuturistic production because George Clinton, like Sun Ra, has this idea of interstellar travel or outer space travel. For those familiar with George Clinton, right, the mothership, right? So it's all falls in line. So we'll dive into that conversation a little bit deeper within about an hour or so. So hope y'all can make it. Have a great rest of your week. Be healthy, be wealthy, be wise. Get that vitamin D, get that water, get that exercise. Peace, y'all.